I don't know why there's this hysteria, and it almost borders on hysteria about COVID. This is a disease that's 99.9% survivable if you don't have a comorbidity or you're not elderly. It's not Ebola. It's not the smallpox. I just, I think maybe what we ought to do is take a step back and take a deep breath and say, we'll do what we can. We'll keep people as protected as we can, but we're never going to get rid of this disease. And I think it's disingenuous on the part of politicians to think, gee, we're going to end this disease completely.
So welcome, and thank you for joining us. And for those who will be watching this, Mr. Cox, you are the former Republican nominee for governor in California and a candidate in the recall election on September 14th. And I am David Lesher. I'm the editor here at CalMatters, and I'll serve as the host for our discussion today. And we have a panel of reporters and editors. So we'll be covering all the major issues facing California today. And as I just mentioned, we'll be recording this and posting this to our voter guide. So I want to make just a quick round of introductions so you can see who's here. And then we'll get as quickly as we can to questions. So for our team, if you could just raise your hand or wave or something when I say your name. Vicki Haddock is our managing editor. Foon Rhee is our political editor. Ben Christopher is our political reporter. Rachel Becker.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah. Hello, good to see you again.
Rachel Becker is our environment reporter. Ana Ibarra is our health reporter. Joe Hong is our education reporter. And Beronda Lyons is our justice reporter. And Manuela Tobias is our housing reporter. She's not here today. She's on vacation. So Foon Rhee will be asking the housing questions. So we've obviously got a lot of ground to cover. And I'll try and step in to make sure we keep on track. But we'll turn it over right away to Ben Christopher to start us off.
Sure. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to do this. So I just wanted to ask sort of about from a political perspective, the feasibility, given that you would, if you were governor, you would be perhaps hampered in your ability to make policy by a supermajority of Democrats in the state legislature. I wonder whether you would, how you would tackle that, whether you would try to negotiate directly with Democrats in the legislature at the risk of maybe watering down your ideas, or would you go more of the executive order route or pursuing ballot measures? So how would you try and get things done?
Well, yeah, let's be honest here. First of all, California has been run by a group of special interests for decades now, and that's what's contributed to the downward spiral. The lack of housing, the homelessness, the lack of water, electricity, the rising crime, the wildfires, the high taxes, all those things. So I recognize right away that there's constituencies that want all those things. And why? Because they benefit in one way or the other. Now, I think the majority of the voters, especially when the majority of the voters turn out Mr. Newsom, which I think is what's going to happen, that will send a message, hopefully, to those interest groups and those legislators who are obviously supported by those interest groups. Now, I'm coming into office as a problem solver. I'm a business guy. I'm not coming in as a naked partisan. That's how I ran in 2018 as well. That's who I am. And so I'm going to propose a number of ways to turn around the situation in California. And I hope we can all agree that there's so many things that have to be turned around in this state. So we need to basically build a bridge from point A to point B on so many areas: housing, homelessness, water, electricity, etc. I'm going to be proposing those right from the get-go when I get elected. And I'll be looking certainly at alternatives for using executive action That's not my favorite alternative, of course. I'm going to try to use that sparingly because I believe in the Constitution of the United States, as well as the Constitution of California, that says that the legislature is powerful. I'm the executive. I just carry out what the legislature wants me to do. So I'm going to propose a package of reforms on all of these issues. And I'll certainly sit down with legislators and try to fashion a majority that will want to deal with these and get the problems fixed. However, I certainly recognize that they may not want to do that because they have, again, that loyalty maybe to the interest groups that like the way things are in this state. And if that's the case, I'm going to go around those legislators and I'll pick out a whole bunch of them and I'll recruit candidates and I'll use my bully pulpit to try to get people elected who will take us from point A to point B, who will vote to fix the problems, frankly, with the common sense solutions that I'm going to talk about. Certainly, I'll listen to concerns of the legislators as to whether they think my proposed fixes have more damage than they wish, that they think is going to happen. But I certainly am taking office to fix these problems, and if they are more interested in protecting their interest groups that are getting them elected, well, then I'll have to go around them and get other people elected, and I'll work to do that.
So if your first preference is to try to work with the legislature, I wonder, have you met with the legislative leaders? And either way, I mean, are there any particular proposals? Are there any particular proposals that you think would be fruitful that you could actually get?
Well, the first one I'm going to work on is housing and homelessness, because I do perceive that to be one of all the crises we're facing. We certainly have a lot of them, like, water, electricity, fires, and crime. But the crisis of affordability and what's going on in our streets, I think is probably the most urgent. So I'm in that business. I'm in the housing business. So I have some definite ideas on what I think can move the ball on getting less expensive housing built, more affordable housing, and also dealing with the homelessness issue. So
is there a particular policy proposal that you think you could get Democrats on board when it comes to housing?
I hope there is. I mean, I hope they would agree that the California Environmental Quality Act should be scaled down or eliminated with respect to housing. I hope they would agree that we've just put way too many mandates on housing. I hope they would agree that we need to have local zoning, but we need to provide, carrots to communities to have more lenient zoning. I hope they would agree that there's literally thousands of square miles of developable land in this state. I think the number is there's 25,000 square miles of grazing land, and there's only 8,000 square miles of urban land. So there's plenty of land in this huge state to build houses. And I think we need to have a policy that's going to allow less expensive housing to be built. The cost of building in the state is just outrageous. We've got to shorten the time frames, and we've got to pare down substantially the opportunities for litigation. And that means we've got to reform CEQA.
And so I know Foon is going to have more questions about housing, but I just wonder, from an actual getting things done perspective, what are the first 3 actions that you plan to take if you were?
Well, again, I'm going to call a special session of the legislature right as soon as I get elected to address housing and homelessness. And one of those will be one aspect of that will be to amend CEQA. And also do what we can about shortening timeframes for approval and reducing the level of mandates and speeding up the approval of housing. The other is to talk about modifications to the Landrum-Petris Act that really has hampered the ability to get conservators appointed for people that are a danger to themselves and to the community. Get more money into treatment, get more money into secular and non-secular private organizations that are frankly doing good work in transitioning people from being on the street to being in productive life. And hopefully the legislature will work with me on those packages.
And so this last year, there was obviously a massive surplus that the state had. There's $38 billion, depending on how you count it. And the governor was very aggressive about pouring that into either housing or homelessness, or TK education, or sending rebates to taxpayers. I wonder how would you have spent that surplus if it was up to you?
Well, first of all, I would have given a big chunk back to the taxpayers in the form of tax cuts. As you might remember, Jerry Brown raised taxes, told everybody it was going to be temporary back in 2012 or 2014, whenever it was. And obviously, it's now been made permanent. I would roll that back. I would cut taxes across the board.
Would you need to go through an initiative to roll that back?
Well, that remains to be seen. It may well require an initiative. If that's the case, we'll work on getting that accomplished. We'll explore that. Once I get in office and I look at the alternatives, there may be some other ways to accomplish the same thing. But certainly I would have done that. Listen, I'm a CPA, and I've also drafted defined benefit pension plans as well as defined contribution plans. And I understand that this state is actually not in surplus. It's actually bankrupt if you really looked at the actuarial assumptions and the earnings assumptions that are underpinning our state employees' pension plan. So I think we need to get a resolution of those things. That's going to be a long-term process. That's going to be a lot of discussion. That's going to be a lot of education of not only legislators, but the employees as well as the electorate on alternatives and corrections to what we're doing in terms of providing for retirement for our state employees and as well as the retiree health care that we promised them. These are significant liabilities. They're significant responsibilities. And I'm not going to kick the can down the road. I'm not going to bury those. I'm going to be honest and level with the people of the state about the issues associated with those. And hopefully we'll be able to educate people enough that we'll be able to solve those.
If the state is functionally bankrupt, you've also proposed a 25% cut to the income tax. How do you tackle one while also cutting taxes?
Well, because we also need economic growth. And the best way to get economic growth, first of all, is to keep business here and foster the growth of new businesses. So there's a balance. We can't tax ourselves into prosperity. We've got to have a reasonable tax system. Our taxes are the highest in the country. The rate of taxation, especially on the middle class. I mean, everybody talks about how we have this 13% tax on rich people. And that's, they say, oh, gee, the wealthy pay 40% or so of the income tax. And, isn't that great? Well, first of all, a lot of those people are leaving the state. So 13% of zero is still zero. Secondly, the tax burden on the middle class is just way too high. And that's on small businesses too, because most small businesses, as you may or may not know, are taxed as flow-through entities. Remember, I'm a CPA. I've created a whole bunch of these entities. So LLCs, partnerships, subsector S corporations, these are all flow-through entities, and small businesses are taxed at these rates. The tax rate on income between $58,000 and $299,000 is 9.3%. That's over double the top tax rate in Colorado, to give you an example. So we certainly don't want the state to empty out and go to Colorado. Now, obviously, it's not. There's still people who value the great weather and the great natural beauty of California, and maybe we'll stay here no matter what the taxes are. But we are still losing on a marginal basis. We're losing businesses and we're losing revenue, and we're losing businesses that just can't be created because the taxes and the regulations and the lawsuits are just too much. So, Ben, I appreciate the fact that we do have an issue with the financial viability of the state, and we got to deal with that. but we also have to make sure that we don't tax people so much that they don't want to come here or that they leave the state. So there's a balance to be done. And, you know,
thank you, Mr. Cox.
we're going to have to get into it.
Yeah, and thank you, Ben, and thank you. And I do want to move on to the beauty of our state and hear from Rachel Becker and talk about who's our environment reporter. So
that's great. Let's do that.
Yeah, thanks for joining us today. As Dave said, I'm an environment reporter at CalMatters, and since we don't have a lot of time, let's just dive right in.
Yeah.
You mentioned
I love the environment. I love the environment here. It's why I moved to California. It's why my mom came out here in the 40s to go to Berkeley. So it's a beautiful place.
You mentioned to Ben that you intend to use executive action sparingly, which makes me wonder, California Governor Gavin Newsom has issued a number of environmental executive orders, including, phasing out the sale of new gas-powered cars in the state over the next 15 years, a mandate to stop approving new oil fracking by 2024. So what happens to these orders if you take office? Okay,
well, let's talk about what will fix the problem, Rachel, because I want to fix the problem. I don't want to just be political, okay? The articles and the studies that I've recently seen say that China and India have produced more pollution than the rest of the world combined. California has done way, way more than its share in terms of reducing global pollution. And remember, it's global pollution that causes the greenhouse gas effect and possible human effect on climate change. So we ought to be talking about what we can do to fix global pollution, not just make symbolic gestures that really are more than symbolic to middle-class people in California, because a lot of these things that Mr. Newsom has done by executive order, let's face it, there's a cost to them. They're increasing the cost to people. And that hurts most significantly middle-class people. So first of all, but let's talk about what's going to fix the problem. California has abundant oil and natural gas resources. What I would like to see done is developing those resources, getting those. LNG is being used all around the world. There's LNG facilities now being built in Mexico, as well as functioning plants in Louisiana and other places. And this involves freezing, obviously, natural gas to a point where it's very concentrated and can be put on tankers and can be shipped to countries like China and India, where it would be competitive with the coal that they're burning. As you might know, they're burning very expensive and very dirty coal.
Liquid natural gas, though, is still a fossil fuel that does produce greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, the methane, the burning of natural gas does not significantly produce greenhouse gas.
Of liquid natural
gas. It's the methane leaking that is
a greenhouse gas.
It is. Methane is a greenhouse gas.
Greenhouse gas.
And it is, and we need to make sure we limit it as much as possible. But we certainly, everything is cost versus benefit, and dirty coal, which is what China and India are dumping into the atmosphere every single day. China doesn't have significant resources of natural gas. So getting those two countries to stop burning dirty coal would go a long way.
So you're proposing to combat climate change is to increase oil and gas production in California?
Absolutely, to ship it to places where they're burning dirty coal and reduce overall pollution. Now that's a transition. Listen, I certainly believe in solar. I also believe in nuclear power as a clean energy. I would stop the decommissioning of the Diablo Canyon, and I would certainly commission an effort to license new, updated nuclear energy facilities in California. I do believe that nuclear energy is the way of the future, along with other sources. I certainly think we can have abundant energy with an all of the above approach, which includes natural gas.
This doesn't quite address, though, the question of what you intend to do with the sale of gas-powered cars and also fracking.
I'd ultimately like to see the market moving away from gas, combustion engines. I think that's already happening. I think major car companies are already doing that because they see the utility. Frankly, I drive a Tesla, and it's the best car I've ever had. Its acceleration is incredible, and it's a smooth running car and silent, and it has a lot of great characteristics on top of the fact that it's not producing greenhouse gases. So I think there's a market for electric cars, and I think that would happen. Can it be done by 2035? I'm dubious, because I don't know that we can even produce the electricity to power those cars by 2035. We can't produce enough electricity on hot summer nights to power air conditioning in California, let alone having every one of our 25 million cars powered by electricity.
And so what do you propose to do about that, about California's electrical system?
Well, as I said, I think nuclear energy, there's a company down here in San Diego I'm very familiar with called General Atomics that is doing cutting edge work on nuclear fusion. You might be aware of the, I think it's pronounced ITER plant in France that's being developed. I think nuclear fusion could be a tremendous benefit in the future. And it's something that would probably result in a great transition away from burning fossil fuels. There's no question I want to get us transitioned away from burning fossil fuels, and I want to clean the air. The fastest transition right now to cleaner air, by the way, is what I said with LNG and getting China and India. That's a quick thing. And by the way, that results in natural gas being exploited in America, which creates jobs, it creates foreign exchange, it creates opportunity to diversify our tax base. So there's a lot of advantages to developing natural gas and oil in California. By the way,
regardless of what is required globally in terms of reducing greenhouse gases, though, California's climate regulators have said that much bigger cuts in climate warming pollution need to happen in order to reach the statutory goal of reducing greenhouse gases 40% below 1990 levels.
Maybe those statutory goals need to be moderated. The trouble, Rachel, is that all of these cost money. All of these cost the electricity payers and the people who have to junk their internal combustion engines and cars and buy new, more expensive electric cars. So there's a cost to doing all these things.
So are you proposing, if you take office, that you would change California's statutory greenhouse gas targets for 2030?
I would work on addressing the global pollution situation. Addressing the global pollution situation is far more important than specific things that are going to drive the middle class in California further into poverty. Can I make that clear enough? We pay so much for gasoline. We pay so much for our cars. We pay so much for energy in this state. It is literally driving the middle class into poverty. We can no longer keep doing that. We need to make this more gradual, but I'm certainly interested in protecting the global air and greenhouse gas emissions. And the fastest and best way to do that is by developing natural gas, liquefying it, getting it over to China and India, where it is price competitive, economically competitive. We could beg China and India all we want to stop using coal in their power plants. And guess what? They're just not going to do it. They have an insatiable demand for electricity, and they want to burn coal. And they're not going to listen to us.
In California, I mean, how do you propose to reach that statutory goal?
California is not an island unto itself. The global pollution of the world affects California. By the way, we're also not talking about what California does contribute to global pollution, which is forest fires. I have significant ideas on what we need to do about managing forests and stop dumping carbon into the atmosphere with regard to these forest fires. I know you're all excited about getting rid of the internal combustion engine. That's wonderful. I drive a Tesla. I'm with you. I want to do it in a way, though, that doesn't kill the middle class. Now, one thing we can do is certainly stop forest fires. And if we can stop doing that, we'll stop a lot of carbon from entering the atmosphere. I think that's a wonderful thing.
So will calling for cuts in fossil fuel emissions be part of the strategy to tackle wildfires? Because climate change, there are many factors, as you discussed.
No, I don't have any misconception that these fires and the failure to put them out is just the result of climate change. It's not. It is not. I assure you.
It's certainly contributing, though. They're multifactorial,
It's a contributing,
obviously, but it is contributing. As one wildfire
contributing
researcher,
factor. I certainly will admit it's a contributing factor, that the warming of the earth. But I tell you, a 1.5 degree increase in the warming of the earth isn't causing these fires. The reason these fires are so bad is because, first of all, we're building into the forest, but we're also not doing what we should do in terms of management. We've run the timber industry out of California. They used to do a lot of the work of controlling forest fires. And of course, we're not doing enough to suppress fires once they ignite. We have got to have a overwhelming response, and this idea that and maybe it's the federal government, we'll have to deal with that too. But this idea of let it burn is not the way we should go. We need to do prescribed burns. We need to get dead trees out of the forest. We need to do what we can to remove combustible timber out of the forest. But the idea that these forest fires are turning into these raging infernos just because of climate change, I'm not going to accept as the full answer. Sorry.
All right. I'm getting motions that we need to move on. I do need to push back a little bit, though, that there has been recent research that says anthropogenic climate change accounts for 45% of total forest burned area from 1994 to 2015 across the West. So,
Rachel, I think if we got China and India to stop what they're doing now and stop dumping dirty coal air into the atmosphere. Pollution is global in scope, and we've got to do something about what those two countries are doing. And they're only going to change if it's economic, and by coincidence, it helps our economy to develop natural gas and ship it over there. But you and I might agree to disagree on that.
Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Rachel. So now let's move on. We'll shift to another topic, healthcare. And I want to bring in our health reporter, Ana Ibarra.
Yes.
Mr. Cox, thanks for being with us. So I wanted to start with, obviously, one of the many crises you've talked about, the pandemic. We are, now experiencing what some experts have called a fourth wave of infections, and hospital admissions are on the rise again, despite the availability of vaccines. I'd like to know, what would you do that hasn't been done to boost vaccination in the state, especially among lower income communities that we know have been disproportionately affected by the virus?
That's a very good question. And it's a good point, by the way, because as I understand it, 90% or so of the elderly have gotten vaccinated. I've been vaccinated. My wife has been vaccinated. My daughter's been vaccinated. So first of all, we need to get people vaccinated. I think we need to do that voluntarily. I am against mandates because I'm for freedom. This disease is serious. There's no question about that, but it's not smallpox. Smallpox is 100 times more lethal than COVID. It's not Ebola. As you might know as well, this disease resides in animals as well as humans, and therefore it's very unlikely that we're ever going to eliminate this disease. We're going to have this disease for some time, probably, if not forever. The best thing we can do certainly is deal with vaccines that ameliorate it, as well as other treatments that ameliorate the effects of the disease. As you may well know, the UK has gotten through their Delta variant crisis, if you call it that, and they're now on the other side of it. I think that's what we're going through now as well. I would use this certainly as an opportunity to talk about getting people vaccinated. Now, why are people not getting vaccinated? I think that's an essential question. First of all, I don't for the life of me understand why the FDA hasn't made this permanent, why it's still an emergency use authorization for the vaccine. I think that's weighing on people's minds. I also think it's a matter of trust in government. We have Gavin Newsom, who broke his own rules to go and have a hypocritical dinner with people, lobbyists. We have Gavin Newsom, who's handed out no bid contracts to his political donors. We have Gavin Newsom, who has solicited donations to his wife's charity from people that have business in front of the state. the crisis that we have with this vaccine is partly related to the crisis that we have in terms of trust in government. As you people know, one of the things that I've done in California is I've tried to call attention to the intersection of money and politics and the lack of trust that people have in their politicians. What we need to do is rebuild trust. And this is a prime example of where trust in politicians is really impacting our national health here, because I think there's a lot of people out there, and maybe black and brown people are more among them, who just don't trust what their leaders are telling them. And that's maybe why they're not getting vaccinated.
How do you propose to repair that trust among these communities?
Well, I'm going to do it, first of all, by example. Secondly, I'm going to be auditing every government agency. I'm going to be proposing methodologies to try to reduce the impact of money in politics. And, who knows? I may have some other ideas, as I've had in the past, about, breaking the connection between money and politics so that people can really appreciate and understand that their politicians are looking out for them and not just for some interest group that's helping them get elected. Now, go ahead.
I was just going to bring it back to vaccines. I wanted to ask, in a debate earlier this month, you said that people who have had COVID don't need to get vaccinated, but the state's public health department and the CDC say otherwise. They say that everyone, even those with previous infection, should get the shot, especially in light of the more contagious Delta variant. So how can Californians be assured that your administration's decisions on the pandemic will be based on best public health practices?
Well, because there's other studies that have been done in England, Israel. There's a whole number of studies, and I'll after this call, I'll cite you the article that referred to them, that say that natural immunity is possibly superior to the vaccines. So there's a difference of opinion among health authorities on this. Unfortunately, too much of this has gotten to be political in nature, and that's regrettable, because this should be all about science. It should be all about cost, benefits, and risks and rewards, and assessing those honestly and openly. So there are other studies, though, that say that natural immunity is preferable. And frankly, there are people who should not get the vaccine, as we know. There's certain immunocompromised people, and there's certain others that where the vaccine could have deleterious effects. So I don't think it's as black and white, and I don't think we're being honest with people if we say that things are as black and white when there's differences of opinion.
I wanted to go just back to my original question of you mentioned you've been vaccinated, and you acknowledge the need of getting people vaccinated, but
I do.
Get the vaccine to some of these harder hit areas that we've known have been, the state has had a harder time getting vaccines to them. Again, some of the most impacted areas. Do you have any ideas of how to take the vaccine to those?
The governor went off on $100 million lottery, and that didn't do it. I don't know, actually. I have to be honest with you. I'll solicit any kind of idea from anybody. I think, it's a matter of leadership again. And, Mr. Newsom's demonstrable lack of integrity on certain issues, I think, make him a bad leader in terms of getting people to trust his word on taking this vaccine. And turning it into a game show, I'm not sure even helped. I just think we just need honest talk about this. And listen, at some point in time, we have to recognize that people may not want to get vaccinated, and they may not feel that it's important to them. And you know what? If I'm vaccinated, which I am, do I really care if someone is unvaccinated?
They can still spread. I mean, the whole point.
They can still spread the disease, but if I get the disease again, it's demonstrated that I'm not going to have serious implications from it. Listen, I've had the flu. I've had colds. We haven't eliminated the colds or flu. I don't know why there's this hysteria. It almost borders on hysteria about COVID. This is a disease that's 99.9% survivable if you don't have a comorbidity or you're not elderly. It's not Ebola. It's not the smallpox. I just, I think maybe what we ought to do is take a step back and take a deep breath and say, we'll do what we can. We'll keep people as protected as we can, but we're never going to get rid of this disease. And I think it's disingenuous on the part of politicians to think, gee, we're going to end this disease completely.
I'm going to move forward because I know we've got 2 minutes left. But aside from the pandemic, healthcare access and affordability continue to be top concerns for many Californians.
Absolutely.
This year, Governor Newsom expanded medical access to more undocumented immigrants. He also has a team of experts exploring how the state can get closer to universal coverage. Meanwhile, Democratic legislators have a single payer bill that will come up again next year. What are your thoughts on some of these efforts? And is coverage expansion and affordability something your administration would take on? If so, what do you think can realistically get done in a year?
Well, I'm a businessman, so I deal with causes of problems. I don't want to just treat the symptoms of problems. Healthcare is too expensive in California. Why? Well, first of all, housing is a big cost. And why is housing a factor? Because nurses, doctors, technicians, everybody has to get paid more in California because housing is so expensive. And we're talking by a factor of 2 to 3 times what it is in the rest of the country. So if we can reduce the cost of housing, we can result in some moderation of healthcare costs. Secondly, one of the reasons healthcare is so expensive is because patient choice and price discrimination is almost absent from medical services. So what we need to do is make sure that prices are transparent, prices are disclosed, prices are that consumers become sensitive to pricing, which means we don't need single payer because that's going to take the consumer further out of the pricing decision. What we need to do is have self-health savings accounts and other methodologies to make sure that patients exercise price discrimination and review of pricing. That's the best way to fix healthcare. Single payer is not going to work. It was tried in Vermont. They ended it within 3 years because it was just way too expensive. Again, when you've insulated people from pricing, you've also insulated them from any care about how much they use or when they use it or what they do with it. So what we've got to do is we've got to bring the consumer back into that transaction as best we can. Now, in terms of undocumented people, we need to solve the immigration problem. I do not believe we should encourage more illegal activity, which is what happens when we cross the border without having a valid visa. And we need to solve that problem. That's going to require politicians to put some of these ideas aside and some of their anger aside and say, hey, let's solve this problem. Let's have a guest worker program. Let's deal with people who have been here illegally, but let's end this idea that our laws can be broken and people can come to this country and expect to get benefits without going through the legal channels and complying with the law. The rule of law is why our economy is successful. If we ignore the rule of law, we will destroy the greatest country that has ever been created, which is what the United States, I believe, is.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Cox. And thank you, Anna. And now I want to turn to the next topic on our list, which is education. And over to Joe Hong, our education reporter.
Mr. Cox, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Joe.
So you've expressed your support for educational savings accounts, otherwise known as school vouchers. So whether that money goes to, traditional public schools, public charter schools, or private schools, why is this the type of systemic change? Why is this type of systemic change the most effective way to close the achievement gap along socioeconomic and racial lines?
And why didn't Gavin Newsom send his children to a public school? He sent them to a private school. And why? Because he chose that school and because he wanted the best education he could get for his children. So the school he sent his children to was competitive. It had to be competitive. It had to have good teachers. It had to train those teachers. It had to make sure that the resources in the classroom were sufficient to make sure those kids learn. Listen, our system has failed. 40% of kids, I think the number is, are failing to meet standards for math. I toured Folsom Prison with the warden who told me that most of his inmates had high school diplomas, despite the fact that they couldn't read to a 3rd grade level. We're graduating kids. We've dumbed down our education system. And worse than that, we've introduced politics into our education system. Instead of reading, writing, and arithmetic, we're teaching race theories and sexual preferences and things like this. We've got to change what we're doing. What we're doing isn't working. We're producing classes of children that just aren't equipped to deal in the knowledge economy. We have to do better. And I think the way to do that is by making the schools competitive. They should not be political. They should be the subject of a parental choice with a parent that has the economic resources to be able to make that choice effectively economically. And that means that we take the money that we're spending, $14,000 per child, we put it into an educational savings account, and we give parents the same choices that Gavin Newsom had.
But how will you make sure that all parents can sort of navigate the system in the same way?
You're saying Gavin Newsom's a lot smarter than most parents in the state. Is that what you're saying?
No. I think he has more resources. But how will you make sure that all parents, whatever type of neighborhood they live in, are able to get the best education for their kids?
First of all, I think you've got to economically empower them. Right now, they clearly are not economically empowered. They don't have the resources Gavin Newsom does. So therefore, they cannot send their children to a private school, and they have to send them to a school in their area that may well be non-performing or not performing as well. That's just wrong. And frankly, because frankly, the majority of our public school children are Black and brown, you could even make the argument it's racist. Let's give the resources to these parents. I think parents in this state care about their children and are every bit as able to choose a school as Gavin Newsom is. And they should be given that same ability. And frankly, I think this will be best for the teachers. I would love to see a bidding war for teachers. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wouldn't it be great if teachers, were paid like baseball players and football players, where there's a bidding war for them because you've got competing schools that want the very best teachers and are willing to pay up for them. And why would they do that? Because they want to have the best school to attract those parents who now have economic power.
I guess the question I'm getting at really comes down to transportation. How do you make sure that there are high quality schools in every neighborhood?
Well, listen, if you're in South Central or Watts and that parents within your geographic area are sitting on $14,000 each in an education savings account, trust me, the free market will make it so that good people will create schools that will attract those monies. Now, I certainly believe in oversight. I certainly believe in the power of district attorneys to go after any school that steals money or doesn't spend it properly or doesn't do the things. And I believe in audits. So, make every one of those schools submit to an audit. I think that's a wonderful idea. I'm going to audit every agency in government myself. So I believe in auditing and making sure money is spent wisely, but that is not an excuse and in those regions, schools will pop up. There'll be consultants, by the way, who will pop up who will be able to render advice to those parents about which school is best for their children. By the way, I think this will result in more opportunities because there'll be more vocational opportunities. We need electricians and plumbers and roofers and carpenters. And so not every kid should go to college. I think we should have schools. There'll be schools that'll pop up and that parents will be able to choose to send their kid to a vocational school that emphasizes those trades.
Right. And now the big question. So what role do you think the state should play in ensuring safe school reopenings this fall in light of the Delta variant? And should masking and vaccines eventually be required for all eligible staff and students?
Listen, I want all students to be as safe as possible. I want parents to have choice. Some of the best proposals I've seen are in other states where I think it's Florida, where they've said, hey, we've got a Hope Scholarship available for parents. If they don't want to send their children to a school where there's no mask mandate, then they can enroll in the Hope Scholarship and get to a school that has a mask mandate. Or they can choose to send their child to a school masked up. But I think it's wrong to require third and fourth graders to wear these messy masks, which I don't think are proven to protect them to any great degree.
Like
the N95 mask protects people, but these cloth masks don't.
Well, like you said about pollution's a global issue. I mean, so is the pandemic. Why shouldn't California do everything it can to stop the spread, especially in schools?
Because there's freedom. Because there's something called freedom and liberty. And I think parents should have freedom. I think we're doing damage to our children by making them wear these masks. I just think that, again, this is a disease that we're not going to get rid of. There's no sign that children are treated, that children suffer disproportionately for this disease relative to other diseases like the flu. In years past, we had flu epidemics and we didn't make every kid in classes wear masks, did we? Does that mean that before, when we had the flu raging through society, that we were, needlessly brutal to our children? No, I think we've just gotten into an hysteria with this COVID pandemic.
Gotcha. So it's like I have a little under 2 minutes. Who would you appoint to the State Board of Education?
I'll defer that question. I haven't, I've got some people that I think, could be good servants, but I'm not going to sit here and just speculate about
what
people.
qualities are you looking for?
I certainly would look for a range of qualities. I'd certainly probably try to get parents, business people, stay-at-home moms. I would try to get academics. I would try to get a range of people that would certainly have the qualifications and the independence to render good decisions, and that's what we need.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Joe. And our next topic is justice. And so I'm going to turn it over to Veranda Lyons, our justice reporter.
Hi, Mr. Cox. How are you?
Wonderful. How are you?
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.
One question about justice. Although voters, I read that you do not believe in the death penalty, although California voters voted in support of it. Governor Newsom issued an executive order creating a moratorium on the practice. If you're elected, would you continue Newsom's moratorium, or would you resume executions?
I would resume executions, because even though I personally am opposed to the death penalty, and I'll argue with people about it, I'll certainly use my bully pulpit to argue for a change, and we'll see if if my efforts will result in people proposing an initiative to take it away. But I'm a small D Democrat, and I believe in the power of voters. And my God, if there's one thing that establishes, again, a lack of integrity on the part of Mr. Newsom, is that the first act he engineers as the new governor is to basically thumb his nose at the will of the voters. The voters not only voted overwhelmingly to keep the death penalty, as you well know, they voted to accelerate, because they were concerned that it was being practically eliminated because appeals took so long. I don't believe in the death penalty, but I do believe that somebody who takes a life should spend the rest of their days separated from society. I think you need not only, to keep people separated from society for the safety of society, but I also believe in deterrent effect. And if you make it clear that people who take a life are going to be separated from society, no parole, nothing, forever, I think that's a sufficient deterrent. I would not take their life, because I think God is the only one that should do that. But, that's my faith. But on the other hand, I certainly recognize that not all the voters believe the same thing I do, and I'm a small D Democrat.
Another question I have for you. If you're elected to be governor, the governor has the authority to appoint judges throughout the state.
Yes.
Who's on your short list for the Supreme Court, and what are the qualities you're looking for to feel that you would?
Again, I'm going to defer specific names. I'm going to just say that the people that I would choose to be on the court will be people who are nonpartisan for the most part, and would also respect the Constitution. We're a nation of laws, a nation of written laws. that are written for a reason, because we didn't want to be ruled by an arbitrary king or an executive like Mr. Newsom, frankly, who decides once he gets in office to do things that are at variance with the will of the voters. We're a democracy. We're a democratic republic, to be specific, where we elect representatives to carry out what we want to do. And but we're a nation of laws and a constitution. And the California Constitution, by the way, has a clear right to an abortion in it. Even though I'm pro-life, I'll certainly respect the fact that the voters have decided to put that in the Constitution. I may argue against it. I may try to persuade people to change it, but I'm certainly going to respect the Constitution.
Who would you persuade to change it? How would you go about?
Well, it would have to be a voters initiated thing, and if it's not going to happen, it's not going to happen. But I respect the law. I respect the written Constitution, and so I will appoint judges who respect the written Constitution.
So would you be willing to put an initiative on the ballot for death penalty or abortions? Is that what you're saying?
Probably wouldn't be the first thing I would attack or anywhere down the line for a long time, frankly. We got so many crises in this state. I mean, my God, we don't have enough water. We have farmers who are going to be run out of business because we don't have enough water. We have Mendocino County that sits right on the ocean, and they're posting notices all over the place to ration water. Can you believe this is happening? And
so it wouldn't be your first choice, but it might be a choice. Is that what you're saying?
At some point down the road, if there were enough of a public, discussion about it and enough of a public, but I believe in voters. I believe in the public. I believe in people, deciding for themselves what they want to do. I certainly will make my own feelings known to people, but I'm not going for this job to be the king of California. I'm running to be an executive that gets things done and fixes these problems.
So one thing, during COVID, there have been outbreaks inside prisons. There's been a lot of pushback from unions to vaccinate prison guards. How would you manage that differently? How would you approach the issues facing?
Yeah, it's a tough situation because obviously prisons by definition are close quarters. And so we'd have to do what we could to try to keep people away from each other as much as we can. I'd look for alternatives to that. I do not think it was a good idea just to release thousands of people out of the prisons. Our prisons need a lot of work. First of all, it costs way too much to house prisoners. I mean, we pay prison dentists $500,000-$600,000 a year. Prison psychologists are making huge amounts of money like that. We're going to need to talk about where we are with these costs, because they've just gone completely out of sight. I think it costs $120,000 a year to house a prisoner in the state. I think we need to look at.
How would you limit that without?
Well, I'm going to look at. I'll get a task force together, I think, to really look at all the costs of our prison system and see where we can make things more efficient and where we could do things differently. But we just can't keep doing things the way we are. Again, this is the highest tax state in the country. Our spending has just gone out of sight. We've got to. I'm a CPA. I have figured out ways to do a lot of things efficiently in my business because I have to, or else I don't stay in business. And I think that's kind of an attitude we need to have in government.
Thank you.
Thank you, Veranda. Our next topic is housing, and Foon Rhee is going to ask questions about that topic.
By the way, I want to mention something about justice was Veranda, is her name?
Veranda, yes.
Veranda. Education, Veranda. We've got the reason people commit crimes is a risk reward decision. They're taking the risk to do the crime based upon how likely it is they'll be punished and what their alternatives are. What we have to do is give people better alternatives, and how education, opportunity, small businesses. We've got to reduce licensing requirements. We've got to reduce the barriers for people to start their own business and be able to run their own business. That is what we have to do to reduce crime. We have to give people better alternatives. I just want to make sure we got that out. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Foon?
Hey, Mr. Cox, it's good to see you again.
Thank you.
So you've already talked quite a bit about housing and homelessness and what a priority it is for you in a special session and so forth. So let's just drill down a little bit more. What would you have done differently during the pandemic last year and continuing into this year on homelessness that Governor Newsom did or didn't do?
Putting people into hotel rooms is a stopgap, but it's not a long-term solution. And you've got to start spending your resources on long-term solutions. So what we've got to do is we've got to get better treatment of people, and we've got to get people job training and get them off of addiction and get them off of, and get them treated for mental illness. That's all there is to it. So, I certainly as a stopgap, putting people in the hotels may have been okay, but this is the result of years of failing to address the real problem here, and that's the addiction, the mental illness, and the job training. There are great organizations around the state, the Dream Center in Los Angeles, the San Diego Rescue Mission, Solutions for Change, which is secular as far as I understand. So, we need to go to these institutions and we need to see what they're doing, and we need to fund them and expand their operations significantly. Obviously, too, we need to get lower cost housing built. And this is where my expertise, I think, will put us in good stead. I can get a development approved in Indiana in 6 to 12 months. It takes 12 years in California. And I assure you, the people of Indiana care every bit as much about environmental factors, traffic factors, building standards, and all the like as much as or more than any Californian. They just feel that it's their obligation to make sure that they don't put too much cost into the development of housing. And that's the problem we have here in California. The cost of building is so high in California. The only thing that builders can do is build luxury housing. You're spending $500,000 a unit. It's uneconomic to try to build something that's reasonably affordable. It's not going to happen.
So let's go back to homelessness for a second. And you've talked, I think, about treatment first, right, as a principle, and changing the law to require people to go into treatment. What if what if the courts stop you from requiring people to go into treatment? Then how do you get around that?
The courts certainly have to be bound by the Constitution. And of course, they have to be bound by law too. So I think they're just interpreting what the legislation is. They don't make law. The courts don't make law. They only interpret it. So I would appeal court decisions that somehow make laws or put onerous requirements on the state in terms of what we're doing with homeless. Listen, every treatment first option I talk about also involves a residential component. Solutions for Change, the Dream Center, the Rescue Mission I mentioned, Father Joe's Villages, all these organizations, there's dozens of them around the state. They all involve a residential component, you understand. So it's not just treatment, it's treatment with residential. And of course, all of them also incorporate job training and education too as well. And I think that's an essential part.
You've talked, or you mentioned quite often during this interview about freedom and liberty. So how does requiring people to go into treatment square with that? What if people don't want to be in treatment?
Well, they can go somewhere else, and they don't have to live on the street. They can go and live in the mountains or do anything else they want. They don't have to live on the street, but the streets, the beaches, and the parks are for everybody. They're not for someone to just sit and pitch a tent. The Constitution doesn't guarantee people every right to use what are really public rights of way. That's firmly established. And so I'm not restricting anybody's freedom. If they want to go live in the mountains and do what they want, they can go ahead and do that. They can, but they're not going to do it on the beach in Venice. That's for sure.
So is that criminalizing homelessness, though?
No,
approach?
I think it's no. I think it's basically saying that you're going to make it so that public areas are for the public and can't be just appropriated by some individual who loves living on the beach and just wants to be able to live on, in a tent in a public park. I'm sorry. Now the voters could change that, I suppose. If the voters, if someone wanted to propose an initiative that would say, gee, all public parks are now available to anybody to pitch a tent in, the voters could do that. If someone wants to try to get an initiative to change the laws or change the Constitution, or they want to get their leaders to change the laws and just make it so that everybody has a right to use the public parks for a tent ground, that's certainly within their rights.
So you mentioned so you mentioned CEQA reform and a couple of other things as subjects of the special session that you would call. What specific things on homelessness would be part of that special session?
Well, again, I think we would ultimately want to modify the Lanterman Act regarding the conservatorships. We'd want to make it so that there would be protections, of course. I would certainly accede to concerns of the ACLU and other organizations that protect civil rights. I don't want to take anybody's civil rights without due process, without representation. As you know, I'm a CPA, but I'm also a lawyer. So I understand due process and I understand the right of representation. I would certainly want people to be protected. I wouldn't want my freedom taken away and have me, be forced to go to a facility like the Dream Center against my will if I, were competent to manage my own affairs. But I think a compassionate society does owe it to the least among us to deal with illness. And frankly, I think it is an illness to think that you can just sit on the streets and shoot up drugs. I think that's an illness. I'm sorry, that's just the way I feel. Same thing with mental illness, schizophrenia. The idea that you think it's okay to just sit out on the street and live in your own excrement is certainly, I think that's an illness and it should be treated as such.
I guess you would acknowledge that treatment is going to cost some money.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
How much are you willing to, of state money, are you willing to invest in this? And do you think the $12 billion that the governor and legislature have set aside on homelessness is the right figure? Too much? Too little?
Well, as with any budget analysis, and as you might know, I'm a big believer in zero-based budgeting, which means you start from zero and you say, okay, what do we want to do and what do we think it's going to cost? And we build a budget based on that. And that's exactly what I would do in this case. I'm not going to venture a guess as to, I don't know off the top of my head, Foon, the specifics of the $12 billion that's being spent. Obviously, I'll have the occasion to find out all the specifics once I become governor. But I'll build a budget with the experts from step one, from zero, and figure out exactly what we're going to need. I will say that my preference would be to fund private organizations that already exist and have a demonstrable expertise in handling addiction and handling mental illness. I like dealing with outside groups because I can hold them accountable very easily. So if we give a group a certain amount of money and we give them a certain amount of responsibility in terms of numbers of people and a certain amount of time, and if they fail to do that, they fail to meet those standards, then we fire them and we go to somebody else. That's accountability. Much tougher to do when you've got government agencies, and that's why I would again, favor using private organizations. And also, by the way, private organizations also allow you to leverage private funding. And there's a whole lot of people in this state that would love to contribute to this effort. They have hearts and compassion just like every one of us. And I'd like to leverage private money with public money on this. I think there's ample opportunity to do that with people.
Okay. I think my time is up, but let me just ask you real quick. You've talked about the exorbitant cost of housing. What if it's local governments that are standing in the way of developing more affordable housing? Are you willing to have the state step in and set mandates or guidelines to make sure it's being built?
I don't want to have the state dictate local zoning. I've served on local zoning boards, so I understand what's involved in that. And I think zoning should be done on a local basis. However, I'm certainly not against having the state weigh in and use its power and use its funding sources to apply a carrot and maybe a stick in the right circumstance to encourage municipalities. I think some of the impact fees that are being charged by some of these municipalities border on outrageous. Again, I think shining the light of day, using my bully pulpit. I think some municipalities need to be brought to heel in terms of the salaries and the benefits and other things that they're paying some of their municipal employees that are resulting in these impact fees being what they are. I think we ought to call those out in the right circumstance. And again, I think sunlight is the greatest disinfectant here. As you might know from my tour, I am a believer in radical transparency. There almost isn't anything government does that should be kept from the voters. And so I'm going to absolutely open the books of the state government. I'm going to open up the proceedings of the state government, and I'm going to do what I can to make sure that voters really appreciate and know exactly what this government is doing and what it's spending its money on.
Okay.
And that goes double for municipalities too.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we're opening it up for some other questions now.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Cox. Thanks very much for your time. I think this has been a really good discussion. We've covered a lot of ground. And
thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And while we may not agree on all these things, I hope you understand that I have an open mind and an interest in solving these issues in an honest and forthright fashion. Go ahead.
Sure, appreciate your time and your sharing your thoughts with us. I know we're at the end of an hour. If you've got just a little more time, I just want to.
I do. I have another 20 minutes or so. I love discussing policy, by the way. I know you guys have all raked me over the coals for using a bear and a trash ball and all this kind of thing. You think I'm all about gimmicks, but as you might know, I'm an attorney and a CPA. I graduated at the top of my classes. I have rendered advice for 40 years to people, and I study issues and been involved in public policy. As you might know, I've written probably a dozen op-eds on all these topics, offering solutions. So I'm definitely as policy oriented as any, more so than a lot of the other candidates. Go ahead.
Good. Well, it sounds like you're a CalMatters reader too, right?
I am. I read you religiously every single day.
Good.
I don't like what I see sometimes, or I don't agree with it. I'll be honest with you, and that's good. We shouldn't all agree on everything. Go ahead.
Good. So I'm just going to open it up to the reporters to see if there's any topics that we discussed that people want to follow up on. So we'll just make it a little informal. Just anybody who has a question. Just.
Mr. Cox, this is Veranda. You mentioned you're an attorney. So
I lost you there, Veranda. Yeah. You're breaking up.
Going back to the question about who you would appoint to the Supreme Court, or who would be your judicial nominations, how would your possible judicial nominations differ from Governor Newsom's? What would be the difference?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. I'll be honest with you. I'll certainly put together, I've got some ideas already, but I've put together a team of academics and lawyers and regular people who will weigh in on what qualifications and what possible candidates there could be out there. I'll certainly solicit a wide range. I'm not just going to just reflexively go to somebody that's conservative, but I have to tell you, my bent is that I want somebody that's going to adhere to the written word of the Constitution. That's not going to basically decide to put their own predilections into decision making, that they will do their best to interpret the written word. And so I guess you might call me a textualist that way, but I think that that's more what my bent would be.
Do you think that that's a problem now? Do you feel like the ruling?
Yeah, I do to some degree. I mean, I couldn't point to any particular person, but I couldn't point to any particular case right now. But I think, we all know that over time we've seen, courts become more and more activist in terms of deciding that certain things, ought to be a certain way, even if the written word isn't quite as explicit.
So, let me jump in with another one. So, Mr. Cox, you weren't really asked this during the debate last week as well. So let me just pose this to you.
Sure.
What makes you, what would make you a better governor than the other 45 people on the replacement ballot? And particularly, the ones that you're on the debate stage with. And
experience, Joe. Joe, I run a multi-million-dollar business for 40 years. And I started with nothing, so I have an appreciation of what it's like to start at the bottom. I didn't have a billionaire like Mr. Newsom, funding my business or doing favors for me, or someone I could rely on. I had to make things go the right way. Listen, I had setbacks, I had problems, but I resolved them and I dealt with them. I've also turned around businesses. I bought a snack food company, again, putting together a team with a lot of people, and we turned it around from a $17 million loss to a $4 million profit in 1 year. I had fun doing that. You guys might not think that's fun, but I had fun making that work. And I look at California as a turnaround project. Even though we're a successful state to some degree, we have gushers of revenue, we're not successful when it comes to basic things like water, electricity, homelessness, housing, fires, crime, the tax structure, the spending, the pension debt, the long-term liabilities. We have definite challenges that we need a business approach to, but we also need a problem-solving approach. And that's what I've done in business. I've had a problem-solving approach, and it's a consensus building. That's what we need, by the way. I think you guys know that there's something like 7 million voters in this state that are not Republicans or Democrats. You appreciate that, right? There's 7 million voters. That's more than there are Republicans. It's almost as many Democrats. So the idea that this state is all just one party really isn't true. There's a lot of people that don't want either party. Well, my mission is to build a consensus as much as I can among all of those voters. And, the fringes may not agree with me on some of these things, but I think I've had enough of a career in terms of solving problems that I think I can get those consensuses built.
So, Mr. Cox, I'll jump in with one. What do you think of the recall? I mean, would you change any of the rules about the recall? I mean, if you were elected and you took office, what's to stop somebody from starting another recall?
I guess they couldn't, and they could point to something that I did, and I guess if there were enough popular support, it would pass. But, Hiram Johnson put it into the Constitution, or whoever argued for it back when the Constitution was created. Listen, if people want to change it, I think there should be a citizens movement out to change it if that's the case. I'm not going to lead that necessarily. Again, I think there's other problems that we need to address that are more urgent. But this has been successful. It's successfully gotten to the ballot, in 2003 and this year. It doesn't seem to me that it's that pressing an issue that it's happened every time. Some people may have done something with Schwarzenegger or with Brown, but I'm not aware that it got anywhere near off the ground. So I don't know that there's an urgency with this governor and with this situation. Listen, I have to be honest with you. Sometimes the media does confound me a little bit because we have some very serious crises that are going on right now. And I think you don't necessarily see that sometimes. The inability to provide water is a crisis to farmers. If you depend on water and your family is about to go out of business, that's a crisis. If your taxes keep going up and up and up like this, if you can't find an affordable house, that's a crisis. We've got a whole bunch of government caused crises in this state that shouldn't exist. And if you compare us to other states around the world, people will tell you California is just a mismanaged mess. We're held up to ridicule all across the country. And I just think that's wrong. And I think we hopefully will turn a corner with this recall. And that's why it's urgent.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Cox, this is Vicki. I have a question about, you mentioned that you enjoy talking about issues, and having sat in on a few of these with you, I believe you. You are animated when you talk about issues. I'm curious about the strategic decision to campaign with a bear and a trash ball and other things. I mean, what led to that? And in retrospect, do you have regrets about whether that sort of undercut your candidacy as a serious guy?
No, I actually don't. Because frankly, it's funny. I pulled up in a hotel last night in Santa Barbara, and I talked to the valet guy, right? And I mean, you got to understand, it's Vicki, right? There are people working 2 and 3 jobs in the state to be able to afford life here. They don't have time to pay attention to politics like you and I do, right? And so, I asked this guy, I'm hopefully going to be your next governor. Oh, great. I'm John Cox. Oh, great. And I could tell he didn't know who I was. I said, but you may have seen a commercial with a bear. Oh, yeah, you're the guy with the bear. So, if that's needed to reach the voters who should have a say, but they don't have the time or the inclination to pay attention to politics, I'm all for it. If some people, no offense, may be a little bit snootier or may think that they're more academic and they think it's beyond, beneath, me to parade around with a bear. The bear didn't talk, as you remember. I talked, and I have serious policy proposals, and I've written a dozen op-eds on these topics. But these, the creative team behind these convinced me that what I need to do is reach people who are working hard in everyday life and don't have as much time to pay attention to politics. And maybe that's needed. I guess I'll evaluate everything after all this is over with. But to the extent that I was able to reach some other people that haven't paid attention to it, I don't think anybody that knows me or that's been with me before, like you, Vicki, I'm a serious person and I have serious ideas, and I built a $300 million business. I didn't do that by being a buffoon. I did that because people trusted me and felt that I had, some level of intelligence and ability.
I guess aside from the bear, the pitch that you're making to voters and that you've been making to us for the last hour, it does strike me as fairly similar to the one that you made in 2018, that you're a businessman, that you can bring those kinds of instincts and experience to the governing process. But I wonder, given that just 3 years ago, voters overwhelmingly did not choose you to be governor, and given that they have all these other options this time around, what makes you think that voters will make a different choice and should make a different choice?
Ben, you look like an honest guy. You obviously appreciate the fact that 2018 was a significant wave election in California and the country, right? I mean, it was the first midterm of a president who was kind of a little bit polarizing, to say the least, and relatively unpopular in California. So come on, let's be honest about this. The 2018 result was flavored with that. As you know, the turnout was almost 13 million people. The next highest turnout before that was 8.5 million, when Meg Whitman spent $160 million or so. So the turnout was 50% higher. So the idea that I lost by this humongous amount because of my deficiencies, is contrary to the idea of the wave and the turnout. The other part of that, of course, is that I was dealing and running against a guy with 99% name recognition, and I wasn't even expected to make the top 2. You guys were all writing about how it was going to be 2 Democrats for so long. Go back and read what you wrote, okay? You didn't give anybody a chance to get into the top 2, and I did. I surprised everybody, and Mr. Newsom had $50 million. I had about 10 million. I raised more than most Republican candidates had done for a long, long time. And this time, the state is very different. The state is even more in crisis than it was in 2018, if you can believe it. Not just the pandemic, but housing and homelessness and water and electricity have all gotten worse. Crime has gotten worse. The wildfires are worse. I would submit to you, Ben, that this governor could have done a lot more on a lot of the areas. He hasn't. State's very different.
So let me follow up to Ben's question a little bit. Have you thought about whether you're the right messenger for this message that you're trying to convince voters about? And have you thought about using your resources to help another candidate? And would you consider that in 2022 if you don't succeed this time?
Well, who knows what's going to happen in 2022? I will say this, Foon. If you look around the country, you got blue states like Maryland and Massachusetts. How do you explain those? I mean, Larry Hogan, by the way, is a pretty conservative guy. He's a social conservative as well as a fiscal conservative. Yet Maryland has a much higher percentage of Democrats, I think, than even California. And he's been very popular. As you know, he's got probably a 60% approval rating or something like that there. Charlie Baker is the same way in Massachusetts, very popular and a Republican and a businessman. And by the way, Larry Hogan lost a race for Congress before he became governor. So, he had lost races before. So the idea, and of course, there's other states around the country that have elected Republican businessmen, Pete Ricketts in Nebraska, Doug Burgum in North Dakota, Doug Ducey in Arizona, and these governors have been pretty popular. And why? Because they focus on solutions. They don't necessarily get involved in the partisan battles as much. And that's what I intend to do. So you're asking me, am I one of the best candidates here? Well, I'm not perfect, but I'm really the only one of the candidates that is a businessman that started his own business. Doug Osee inherited his business from his father. He's a great guy, but I have a different perspective on things that way. And I think it's about time that California have a business person. I hope you might agree with that. We've tried politicians. We've tried media celebrities. That's a different skill set. I have the skill set of a businessman that's had to solve problems by bringing people together and looking at causes and looking at long-term solutions. And I just think, my outlook on those things, is able to do this. Listen, I'm not doing this to get a job or write a book or, make more money. I have more than enough money, as you can tell, but I want to do something. I want to really help people. And, if you know my background, I've started charities. I've been involved in charities. I've worked to try to help people. And I think that's what we're on this earth to do.
Any other questions?
I have one. So public health experts and Governor Newsom have said that considering the wide availability of vaccines at this point, the pandemic is a choice. But you've said that you think the pandemic is going to be around for a really long time. So, I mean, so you agree that it's a choice, and you've also used the.
I think I said it's a choice. The vaccine's available. It's available for free, by the way, right? To anybody that wants it, basically. It's not only free. The government was going to pay you to get the vaccine, right? So it is freedom of choice that if people don't want to get the vaccine and they get sick. I chose to get vaccinated, which means that if I get sick, I probably won't get very sick. And yes, I do believe, according to what I've read, the experts, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not going to pretend that I am, but I've read a lot about these things. And most of the literature I've read have said that this is a disease that has animal reservoirs, and therefore it's not something that's going to be easily removed. Apparently, smallpox was a different kind of virus, and we were able to remove smallpox, but we've been very unsuccessful. We've never eliminated the common cold. We've never eliminated the flu. We've never eliminated any of these other viruses. And I don't believe that we're going to eliminate this one. I hope I'm wrong, Joe.
I guess when you bring freedom into the equation, into the conversation, I guess I'm asking, like, do you think people should have the freedom to prolong this pandemic? Because that's sort of the way Gavin Newsom is framing it.
Well, he may frame it that way, but I think people should have the ability to damage themselves if doing so means that they're not necessarily damaging me. And I guess that's the rub here. Because I'm vaccinated and because I chose to get vaccinated, because the vaccine protects me to a 95% degree, I would say the answer might be different, by the way, if the vaccine were only 20 or 30% effective. Yeah, I might have a different view of that. But this vaccine is 95% effective, or all these vaccines are highly, highly effective. And so I don't consider it, someone who's unvaccinated as just damaging me. And I guess that's where, Mr. Newsom and I might part company. It's this old story too, 600,000 people a year die of heart disease, okay? Because they don't exercise enough and they eat bacon and butter all over the place and all those kinds of things. Now, them getting heart disease indirectly hurts me because they're driving up the demand for healthcare services. A lot of them are getting government healthcare services, which is costing me a lot of money. Should I sit here and tell those people that they should never eat bacon or they should never eat butter? Should I tell them that they have to exercise 4 times a week like I do? No, I recognize that in a free society, we all have choices to make. There's a limit to what we should and can force people to do in a free society. We didn't do this when we had the flu, did we? Did we force people to get the flu vaccine? No.
In certain professional categories, you are required to get, and I guess, the governor did just come out with this requirement that teachers be vaccinated, which I know you oppose. That to me does seem like a circumstance in which if someone is not vaccinated,
we never required, now come on, Ben, we never required teachers to get the flu vaccine.
Right, but what I'm saying is that would be a situation in which, because many children are not yet eligible for a vaccine, that they are potentially being put at risk.
But children weren't getting the flu vaccine either. And we never required teachers to get the flu vaccine.
Is the flu vaccine not required for elementary school students?
Required for children.
I don't think so. The flu vaccine?
Or several vaccines, not that several vaccines are. Like
several vaccines are, measles, mumps, rubella, and all those things. But I don't think the flu vaccine was ever required. I could be corrected on that. I haven't had an elementary school child for about 10 years now. My daughter's 16. But I don't think the flu vaccine was ever required to attend elementary school.
There is an argument that with a large number of people unvaccinated and spreading variants of the virus, it allows more variants to emerge that could evade vaccines. So there is an additional, when you say people who are vaccinated don't really incur that much risk because they have protection, we're already seeing that new variants increasingly are able to evade vaccines, which does put not only unvaccinated people, but also vaccinated people at greater risk.
Well, so-called breakthrough infections. Yeah, again, there's a judgment to be made here between freedom and absolute protection. I guess you're arguing that we need to demand and we need to mandate this and we need to, be absolute in that regard, and people need to get this injection. And I might take a different view of that. And I think there's a judgment call to be made there. And, I don't know if it's something we want to put to a plebiscite, but, I think there's a judgment call to be made. There's a lot of arguments on both sides, frankly.
Well, Mr. Cox, I sure want to respect your time and say thank you for sharing your time with us and for and sharing your thoughts. It's been a really good discussion. We've covered a lot of ground, and look forward to talking to you again as we approach.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To learn more about the recall election and more on candidates' views, check out our Recall Voter Guide on CalMatters.org.